This incredible story, which began in 1977, shocked the world with its denouement 34 years later. A young mother took her 6-month-old baby and went to a store near her home. She never returned home, and the police could find no trace of her. It took several decades for everyone to learn the truth and to see that such twisted plots do not only happen in the movies. This story began in the sunny American state of Hawaii. In early 1977, a young couple, 26-year-old Mark Barnes and 31-year-old Charlotte Moriarty, had a son named Marks. It seemed that a happy and carefree future awaited the family among palm trees, sunshine, and boundless ocean. Mark worked as a veterinarian and Charlotte was an artist. The couple wasn't married, which didn't stop them from loving their child and giving him the best of everything. Before meeting Mark, Charlotte had been married and had a daughter who stayed to live with her father in New Mexico. After the divorce, her mother kept in contact with her and tried to visit her whenever possible. Fast forward to June 21st, 1977. On that day, Mark had been working on the property since early in the morning, and the man was planting Charlotte's favorite flowers around it. The girl told him she wanted to walk to the store, so as not to distract Mark from his work, she decided to take her son with her, put him in the stroller, and left. A few hours passed. Mark was so worked up that he didn't immediately realize. Charlotte should have been back by now, since the store was only a few blocks away. After waiting a few more hours, he decided to walk to that store in hopes of meeting Charlotte on the way. As he stepped away from the house, he saw his son's empty stroller standing near the bus stop. Neither the child nor Charlotte was anywhere to be found. It would seem that he should have gone to the police immediately after that, but Mark didn't. As he explained later, Charlotte could sometimes go somewhere for a few days unannounced and then return home. The man decided that this time would be no exception. It sounds strange enough that if Charlotte had gone out alone, Mark's logic could still be understood, but she had taken her 6-month-old baby with her, abandoned the stroller in the middle of the street, and seemed to have vanished. 2 days passed, but Charlotte never showed up. Then Mark decided to call the police, and they advised him to wait a few more days. What if the girl and the baby still returned home? So he did, and 2 days later he called the police again. This time he was asked for a description of Charlotte and the child, and then they promised to start a search. But after that call, no one contacted Mark, and the fate of his girlfriend and son remained a mystery. 3 weeks passed. Mark decided to go to the police station to see how the search was going, and here the strangeness continued. There he was told that no calls had been received from him. The police allegedly couldn't find any evidence that Mark, over the phone, had told them about the missing girl and child. Of course, no case was open and no one was looking for the missing all this time. Let's dwell on this point in more detail. Mark assured everyone that he had called the police twice. The police said that every call was registered and that there had simply been no calls. It is unclear which of them is right, but both scenarios are plausible. If the police really did refuse to start looking for the 6-month-old, they could have been in serious trouble. Missing small children obliged the police to search immediately, even if only a few hours have passed since the disappearance. So in this case, the police may well have covered up the fact that they did not search for the infant. The father's behavior also seems strange. Why did he wait several days before calling the police? And were there any such calls? Even if he did call, why did he wait 3 more weeks after those calls and only then decide to go to the station? After all, in all that time he had not even called there to find out anything about the progress of the investigation. In his conversation with the detectives, Mark reported that Charlotte might have some kind of mental health problem. In the 70s, psychiatry was still gaining ground, so no treatment had been given to the girl. Neither she nor Mark even went to the hospital, even though there were very serious reasons to do so. According to Mark, Charlotte walked around the house for the first few weeks after giving birth with only a blindfold on and couldn't properly explain why. Given that there couldn't possibly be a logical explanation here, Mark was worried beyond belief and was already thinking about seeing doctors. But then Charlotte removed the blindfold and began to behave completely normally. The man decided to forget the story and not to pay any attention to it. That Charlotte's disappearance could be related to mental problems was indirectly suggested by another fact. Mark said that her daughter, who was 8 years old at the time, was going to fly to Hawaii in June to visit her mother. Charlotte was looking forward to that meeting, but at the last minute the girl's father canceled all plans and told Charlotte that they will not come this summer. This very much upset the girl, and mental disorders can be provoked by strong negative emotions that Charlotte experienced. Even in the quietest stages of a life, a person does not show any signs of unstable psyche. But all these theories did not bring the police any closer to finding the girl and her son. They opened a case, posted flyers all over the place, and couldn't find a single clue. Mark later recounted that for a year and a half after Charlotte and his son disappeared, he became obsessed with searching for them. He drove all over the island, hoping to find them alive and unharmed, but it never happened. 2 years after they went missing, he moved to California. Nor did the police have much hope in the case. Given the complete lack of evidence, no one believed that the girl and child could be found. Compounding the situation was the fact that crucial time for the search had been lost in the first few days. 24 years had passed. Mark had started a new family, and he had 2 daughters. He had long ago stopped believing that he would one day see Charlotte and Mark's alive. But in 2001, the case took a new turn. Charlotte's daughter from her first marriage, Jennifer, flew to Hawaii and went to the police station. She convinced them to reopen the case of her mother's disappearance. The detectives agreed, put Charlotte and Mark's information into the missing persons database, and created a computer portrait of Mark's growing up based on his childhood photo. The first thing the detectives decided to do was to interrogate Mark because his behavior in the early stages of the investigation seemed strange to them. There was no mention in the old documents that the man had called the police station by phone 2 days after the girl and child disappeared. It said he did not come to the police station until 3 weeks later. This led detectives to believe that Mark may have been involved in their disappearance. Even though 24 years had passed since then, the police tried to find any witnesses who lived near Mark and Charlotte's home. Of course, most of the residents had already changed, but the detectives were lucky enough to find one senior citizen who had lived there back then. He remembered Mark and Charlotte and told the detectives an interesting fact. According to the pensioner, the couple often quarreled, and he heard them shouting. The detectives then decided that the case was getting close to a solution and Mark was indeed guilty. He was called in for questioning and told about the witness who had heard his regular arguments with Charlotte. Mark did not deny that there had indeed been verbal altercations between them. He also asked to see a married couple who would never fight. Detectives tried with all their might to prove his guilt and offered Mark to voluntarily undergo an interrogation with a polygraph. The results were ambiguous. The specialist who read the testimony could not give a clear answer whether the man was guilty or not. A polygraph is inherently an overrated instrument. It is not physically capable of showing whether a suspect is lying or not. Dozens of factors can affect its results. Lies can be mistaken for the truth and vice versa. If an innocent person is very nervous during an interrogation or withholds completely different information that is relevant to the questions, the polygraph can make him out to be a liar. In Mark's case, the polygraph was of no use either, but the detectives decided to go at it from a different angle. They obtained a warrant to examine the house where Charlotte and Mark lived in 1977. What interested them the most was the terrace, built shortly after the girl and child went missing. They speculated that Charlotte might not have gone anywhere that day, but might have been hurt by her husband in another quarrel and ended up in the ground under the terrace. It is not clear how the police imagined the events of that day and how an infant fits into the story, but they had no other versions. Forensics dug through the backyard and examined the terrace, but they were unable to find any trace of anyone's remains there. It is not known if they compensated the new owners of the house for the 2 days of digging in the backyard. The detectives admitted they had nothing else to work with and set the case aside again. As a last resort, they took DNA samples from Jennifer and Mark, hoping it would someday help. The case went into a long drawer again for a full 10 years. But after that time came the grand finale to this whole tangled story. Steve Carter, 35 of Philadelphia, had wondered about his past from an early age. He grew up in an orphanage, and at the age of 4, he was installed by a wealthy New Jersey couple. The U.S. Army officer and his wife loved the baby and cared for him as their own. Steve also loved his foster parents, but he always wondered how he ended up in the orphanage. In 2011, he stumbled upon an internet article that told the amazing story of Caroline White, who had been kidnapped from the hospital when she was just 19 days old. Decades later, Caroline was browsing missing children's websites, found her childhood photo there, and realized with horror that it was her current parents who had kidnapped her from the hospital. Steve Carter was inspired by the story and began researching the same sites. He entered his birth information on his certificate and was immediately speechless. The first result showed an adult photo of him taken by artists based on a baby picture. The resemblance was so strong that Carter could not even move in shock. He realized he was the same Max Barnes who had gone missing in Hawaii with his birth mother. After recovering from his shock, Steve made the decision to take a DNA test, taking the opportunity through a missing child search service. Their database contained DNA samples of Mark and Jennifer taken by the police 10 years earlier. After 8 months of waiting, the test showed an exact match. Steve Carter turned out to be Mark's Barnsom. Police instantly reopened the investigation. The missing infant found himself 34 years later, but the circumstances of his disappearance were still a mystery, but not for long. His birth certificate helped solve the mystery. First, the certificate was not issued until a year after the birth of the child. Second, his name was Tenzin Amia and his mother's name was Jane Amia. That's what helped the police to connect the two key strands, because that name had already appeared in the reports. Not long after Charlotte and the child disappeared, the police received a strange call. A woman reported that a girl with an infant baby had knocked on the door in her house and asked for milk to feed her. The police arrived on the scene, believing that the girl was in an inadequate state. She was taken to a psychiatric clinic for evaluation, and the infant was handed over to the guardianship authorities. This girl was Charlotte. After a few days in the hospital, she secretly escaped and was never seen again, and the child remained in the care of the state, because he did not even have a birth certificate and it was impossible to identify his relatives. When the truth came out, everyone had a legitimate question: why the police did not compare the disappearance of the girl and the baby to another situation, especially when the infant was left in the care of the state. Couldn't they have realized that they had the very same child in front of them? Now, 34 years later, it's hard to answer that question. Perhaps the police simply didn't know about the disappearance, because the two cases were handled by two different precincts. Steve, who by then was working in a prestigious job and had a family of his own, decided to make contact with his half-sister and biological father. They were shocked when the man revealed his own disappearance. No one believed anymore that the infant might still be alive. Although we don't know what happened to Charlotte, the ending of this story can definitely be considered happy. Sad statistics tell us that the chances of finding missing children after so many years are zero, but the case of Mark Barnes was one of the rare exceptions. He grew up in a wonderful family, received a good upbringing, and became a successful man. Most likely, Charlotte was indeed suffering from a serious mental disorder. She knocked on the door of a stranger, asking for milk to feed her son. Perhaps the call to the police saved the infant's life. Who knows how Charlotte's mental state would have changed in the future? It is still unknown what happened to her, and it is unlikely that the mystery will ever be solved. Considering that she never tried to contact her husband or find her son, the woman could have died a short time after escaping from the asylum. Perhaps timely medical care could have changed the girl's condition for the better, and this whole story would have never happened. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thanks for watching.